Hey everyone, Jim Branscombe here for the Cinematic Void vlog. Today I'm going to be doing another top 10 list, but this one's going to be a little bit different because it's actually a continuation of a list I had previously done. Last year for January Giallo, and for my first top 10 list, I did my top 10 Giallo films. And originally the list I had worked out was a top 20, but I just felt like maybe that was a little too much for a list and that kind of stuff. But since it's January and January Giallo again, I thought maybe why not just share the other 10 films on my top 20. So this is going to be 10 more Giallo film favorites. The order, I'm going to be doing 1 for 10, but whatever number 1 is, that's number 11, and number 10 on this list is number 20. You know, just think of it like that. And since this is a continuation of a list, that means the rules remain the same. 1 film per filmmaker, 1 film per franchise, although Giallo films don't really have franchises. But that means you won't be seeing any Dario Argento or Lucio Fulci or Sergio Martino or Umberto Lenzi or anyone who had a film on the original top 10 list. They won't be on this list. So it's going to be 10 brand new filmmakers and 10 brand new films. So why don't we go ahead and slide on those black gloves. I guess there's an O.J. Simpson joke in here anyway. Let's just go ahead and check out my 10 more Giallo favorites list here. At number 10 on my 10 more Giallo favorites list is kind of a later era Giallo film. It's actually from the 80s, which is way past the peak of the Giallo film, which was the early 70s. But this one's a lot of fun. I'm talking about 1985's Nothing Underneath. For those who haven't seen the movie, there's a park ranger that works at Yellowstone. I mean, that doesn't really sound very Giallo-like, I get it, but he starts having these like psychic visions of his sister, who's a model working in Italy, and her being murdered. So what does he do? Hey, he flies to Italy to go try to figure out what's going on. Now, this has some great kills. You get definitely a black glove killer using scissors as the primary weapon of choice, but the real reason that I'm putting this film on the list is for one particular scene featuring Donald Pleasance. So the scene in particular is Donald Pleasance plays a police inspector and he's meeting the park ranger from Yellowstone, and they're having a discussion, and it's at a Wendy's in Italy. And you see Donald Pleasance go to the salad bar, you see him throwing lettuce around, you see him eating spaghetti with no sauce for reasons. It's just a really, really insane scene.
I was in a skiing accident a few years ago. A real bad one. I was buried under an avalanche.
I mean, how many films have you ever seen that someone stops and eats at a Wendy's, let alone one in Italy in a Giallo film? Number 9 on my 10 more Giallo film favorites list is a very sleazy, erotic thriller kind of Giallo film. It's from 1972. It stars Farley Granger, who most of you might recognize from Alfred Hitchcock's Strangers on a Train or Rope. It has Barbara Boucher, who's in a ton of Giallo films, including Lucio Fulci's Don't Torture a Duckling and The Red Queen Kills 7 Times, and also has Rosalba Neri, who was in a bunch of Jess Franco films. The film I'm talking about is A Muck.
When A Muck plays in this theater, you will see it complete, with nothing cut out.
And what is a muck exactly? Well, a secretary for some business guy played by Farley Granger is hired on and meets his wife, who I guess was having a secret affair with the previous secretary, and that secretary ended up dead. So now the wife and the secretary are trying to figure out, who killed the previous secretary? And lots of sexiness and other Giallo hijinks ensues. I showed this last year for my January Giallo lineup. Unfortunately, I was not there for that screening. I was actually in Chicago doing a Q&A with Sergio Martino for their January Giallo, so I was kind of bummed that I got to miss seeing A Muck on the big screen because I programmed it so I could watch it on the big screen. But if you get a chance to see it in a theater, definitely check it out. Keeping things sleazy, at the number 8 spot on my 10 more Giallo film favorites list is Strip Nude for Your Killer, starring Edwidge Fenech, the Giallo Queen. For those who haven't seen the movie, a model goes in and gets a, let's see, how do I word this so I don't get demonetized? Has a pregnancy terminated and things go awry and she dies, and then afterwards, a motorcycle helmet-clad killer starts offing people, starting with that doctor that messed up that medical procedure. The movie has lots of J&B bottles. It's ultra sleazy. Edwidge is absolutely captivating in it, as she always is in pretty much every film she's ever been in. One thing I want to note, this is part of one of my favorite sub-genres, which is motorcycle helmet killers. There's a couple other Giallo films or Giallo adjacent films that feature them, including What Have You Done to Your Daughters, Nightmare Beach, and Night School. Andre Bonacci also directed one of my favorite zombie movies, which is Burial Ground, aka The Nights of Terror. So if you enjoy that movie, you know what you're getting into when you check out Strip Nude for Your Killer. Number 7 on my 10 more Giallo film favorites list is directed by Michele Soavi. He directed, incidentally enough, another one of my favorite zombie movies, which was Della Morte dell'Amore, aka Cemetery Man. This is kind of his narrative feature film debut. The film is Stage Fright, aka Aquarius. For those who haven't seen it, there's a theater group that's in the middle of a rehearsal for their big production that's getting ready to go live, and they're having problems and they're arguing, you know, basically theater drama. And things get a little more dramatic when an insane person escapes from an asylum, sneaks into the rehearsal space, and starts killing them. Now, this is a bit of a Giallo slasher hybrid. It definitely kind of leans more slasher, but it does have a really iconic looking killer, the killer wearing the owl mask. Michele Soavi just made great movies, still making great movies, and if you haven't seen this one, definitely check it out, especially if you prefer your Giallo films to be more on the slasher side of things. At number 6 on my 10 more Giallo film favorites is Death Walks on High Heels. The film stars Susan Scott, aka Knives Navarro, who is also married to the director Luciano Ercoli and did a couple other films with him, including The Forbidden Photos of a Lady Above Suspicion, but she was also in a ton of other Giallo films, including All the Colors of the Dark and So Sweet, So Perverse. For those who haven't seen the movie, a French stripper is being harassed and stalked by a man who wants a cache of diamonds that her father had, so she flees the country with a doctor, and well, you guessed it, Giallo hijinks ensues. And if you haven't seen it yet, definitely check it out. I mean, it's on my list for a reason. For number 5 on my 10 more Giallo favorites list is probably a Giallo that has one of the weirdest premises ever concocted. I mean, well, I'll just explain to you. The Giallo takes place on a genetically modified chicken farm. I'm talking about Death-Laid Egg, aka Plucked. For those who haven't seen it, well, I gave you part of the premise, but basically the guy that runs this weird chicken farm thing is having issues with his wife, who's very demanding and controlling, kind of falls for her cousin that's really sexually liberated, and well, you guessed it, Giallo hijinks ensues. I showed this film back in 2023, part of my January Giallo series in Los Angeles. Kind of split the audience because it's just really weird, not really traditional, and has a really abrasive, like, kind of brutally unnerving soundtrack. But I really like this one because it's just so weird. And I mean, who sets a movie, let alone a Giallo, at a chicken farm? Coming at number 4 on my 10 more Giallo film favorites list is a reason why you should not look into the sun directly or pay attention to solar flares and stuff like that. I'm talking about 1975's Autopsy, aka The Next Victim. This movie stars Mimsy Farmer, who's in a bunch of other Giallo films, including Four Flies on Grey Velvet, Ray Lovelock, who's in a ton of Eurocrime stuff, and Barry Primus, who's in a lot of early Scorsese films, including Boxcar Bertha, and actually was in one of his later movies, including The Irishman. For those who haven't seen the movie, and I kind of already hinted at this, a bunch of solar flares, sunspots, heat wave, some issue with the sun is making people, again, I gotta word this carefully so I don't get demonetized, cause people to self-terminate. Yeah, I think that'll go. And a morgue worker, played by Mimsy Farmer, is dealing with all these bodies coming in, and it's kind of triggering stuff. She's sexually repressed, and she's having these wild hallucinations while in the morgue. But when the body of a woman that she had just met shows up the morgue, she starts thinking that, I don't think this person actually self-terminated. I think someone murdered her. And that's basically your plot for Autopsy. This one's a lot of fun. Barry Primus plays a race car driver turned preacher, which is, does that even happen? Doesn't matter, but I should mention I screened this back in 2023 for January Giallo, and I was lucky enough to have Barry Primus show up and talk about being in this movie. Now, Barry was clearly not the biggest fan of this movie, but he sat through, he had a good time, and answered questions, and told some great stories, even though he thinks the movie's pretty ridiculous. And maybe it is. It does have a Hall of Fame dummy drop, which if you go back and check out my dummy drop list, the one from this movie is on there. And it has a really incredible score by Ennio Morricone, one of the best musical composers that ever did it. At number 3 on my 10 more Giallo films favorites list is one of the more art house entries for a Giallo film. I'm talking about 1976's The House with the Laughing Windows, directed by Pupi Avati. The film stars Lino Capoluccio, who is an artist who's hired to restore a fresco at a church in a small town. As he starts the process of the restoration, he starts hearing things about the original artist, that the guy's a madman, he had 2 crazy sidekicks, they were killing people, and there's some just weird and eerie stuff, and no one in the town actually wants this thing restored. But, you know, Giallo's got a Giallo, so he sets forth with it. In the meantime, he's also hooking up with a local school teacher because it's a Giallo film. You gotta get the sex in there as well. And of course, the rest of the Giallo hijinks start happening, so people start turning up dead. This film is a bit of a slow burn, so if that's not really your bag, you might want to steer away from it. And Pupi Avati definitely likes slow burn horror movies, especially if you ever sat through his zombie movie Zetter. You know how leisurely paced that one is. But if you don't mind slow burns and want something a little more art house for January Giallo, definitely check out The House with the Laughing Windows. For number 2 on my 10 more Giallo favorites list, this is another film that stars Lino Capoluccio as well as Stefano Pisani, who is in Dario Argento's Suspiria. I'm talking about the Bloodstained Shadow. For those who haven't seen the movie, years ago on this island, a young woman is murdered in a meadow. No one ever solves the crime, and then a young man decides to come back and reconnect with his priest brother, and you guessed it, Giallo hijinks ensues. I really like this Giallo film a lot. It's actually pretty late in the era for Giallo films that came out in 1978, and incidentally enough, I'm going to be showing a Italian language print for this year's January Giallo 2025. I love this movie a lot, but one of the coolest things about this film is the soundtrack. The soundtrack was composed by Stelvio Cipriani, who's a great Italian composer. He did soundtracks for Mario Bava, but he wasn't the one that actually played the music. The band Goblin, yes, the Goblin that did Dario Argento's Deep Red and Suspiria, actually performed the score, although they're not credited, but if you listen to it, it's clear that it's Goblin playing this. So kind of a cool collaboration of 2 great Italian soundtrack heroes on one movie. And at the number 1 spot on my 10 more Giallo films favorite list is a movie that stars Edwidge Fenech and George Hilton. It was written by Ernesto Gastaldi, who wrote many great Giallo films, has an incredible score by Bruno Nicolai, and it was produced by Luciano Martino, who's the brother of Sergio Martino. And if this all sounds like a Sergio Martino movie, it does, but it's not. And it is The Case of the Bloody Iris, aka what are those strange drops of blood doing on Jennifer's body? Which might win for the most ridiculously long Giallo title ever. For those who haven't seen the movie, a woman played by Fenech just escaped a sex cult, and now she's being targeted and stalked by a, well, not a black glove killer, a rubber glove killer, but everything else is pretty much, you know, Giallo killer motif. You got the hat, you got the obscured face, just rubber gloves instead of black gloves, but, you know, operates the same way. This has some really great murder sequences, including one in an elevator. Definitely check out The Case of the Bloody Iris. So that's going to wrap up my 10 more Giallo films favorites list, and if you haven't already, go check out my previous top 10 Giallo films list and watch them back to back. That will give you my top 20 essentially. And after you watch both those, you know, sound off the comments. Tell me about some of your favorite Giallo films, or what do you think of this list, or were there some Giallo films I didn't mention that you really like and would put on your list? You know, this is what this is all about. It's about discussion and, you know, camaraderie between cinephiles. And if you haven't already, make sure you like, subscribe, and all that good stuff that, you know, helps keep this YouTube channel afloat. But until next time, see you in the void, and happy January Giallo.